Not certain about you guys, but I'm confused. Back in the day when this thing first came out, Mercedes Benz had a grand total of 3 SUVs. Small, medium, and large. Simple enough, even I could understand. However, fast forward to 2021, or so they tell me this one is, and they all of a sudden have a grand total of 7 SUVs. But that's not the confusing part. What's confusing is the last crossover from Mercedes-Benz that you and I drove. It was stellar, the GLB, and that one has more utility than this one, is about the same money, and shares the exact same engine. So what we need to do today is drop the B, reacquaint ourselves with the A, and understand how this thing fits into the world of today. Kicking things off with something you and I are familiar with from other Mercedes-Benz product, a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that is both gas direct injected as well as turbocharged. In this application, 221 horsepower that comes in at 5,500 RPM and 258 pound-feet of torque that comes in at 1,800 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,000 RPM. Now that power can go through any transmission you want as long as it's an 8-speed DCT. If you are an eagle eye, you could tell by the placement of that engine, this is primarily a front-wheel drive vehicle. However, it can be had as all-wheel drive. Performance figures, not exactly the stuff of AMG legend. However, VMAX, 130 miles an hour. 0 to 60 as a front-wheel drive, 6.8 seconds. 0 to 60 as all-wheel drive, which this car is 6.6 seconds. Now, I'd love to share EPA estimates with you. However, that information is not currently available at the time of this filming from the US government. Another differential that's germane to what we're about to do is the weight difference. And that is about 150 to 250 pounds, depending on how each vehicle is equipped. This one is all-wheel drive, so figure it's on the lower end of that scale. With that, like in the GLB, there is a good amount of usable power for the purpose at hand, meaning going around town, using it as a baby buggy. Maybe this one's more empty nesters because it doesn't have the third row seat, but absolutely usable power. Now, Hinweis there, you do get a lot of noise to get that power out of that engine. No, it wouldn't take a brain surgeon to determine that this is based off the Mercedes A-Class, and we've already driven one of those before, an A220, so very similar underpinnings here, which means McPherson strut up front, multi-link in the rear. This one is fitted with a special AMG line package. No, it's not an AMG, but it does have 20-inch AMG wheels, which I have to say look pretty cool. The brakes, not the most exotic fare for Mercedes. Vented discs up front, solid discs in the rear. And then there's a pretty sizable departure in the all-wheel drive system, what they call 4MATIC. The clutch, it goes from a hydraulic clutch to an electromechanical clutch, and that enables 2 things. Number 1, the drive modes. So the most basic drive mode, it's 80% of the power to the front, 20% of the power to the back. In a sport mode, 70 in the front, 30 in the back. Then the off-road mode, 50-50. But when we get into that off-road mode, the system, it can read multiple inputs, and not the predictive stuff like we talked about with Coleman and the Mazdas. This has more points of input. So it's not just the steering angle from the driver or the driver's foot on the accelerator or the brake. This also takes into account other data points like the friction between the tires and the road, the ambient temperature, and the gradient of the road. Driving dynamics are more about ride quality here than flat-out control over pitch, squat, dive, and roll. And this does a very good job. I don't know if it's better than the GLB, but it does a very good job about controlling the overall movement of a high center of gravity vehicle. And this is where we get to somewhat of an unusual surprise here. This is a Mercedes, that you'd expect a very Deutsche-type ride. This, if I'm looking at it on a spectrum of driving dynamics, this is closer to a Lexus. Once again, demonstrating practicality. So with that, this is where I, a 6-footer, would sit, which opens up the larger discussion of usability back here. And falling under that heading, there is a lot of moving parts. Number 1, vents. They cannot be controlled from back here. They have to be controlled from up there. Number 2, not 1 but 2 USB-C ports, as well as a 110 outlet. And then there is an armrest here, as well as not 1 but 2 cup holders. And then there are 2 party tricks over here. One comes fitted as standard, and that is an adjustment of recline or torture position like this of the seat back, and it's a 60-40 split. And then one you have to pay extra for, and that is the rake adjustment of the back seat. That's a nice touch, but really I got to pay extra for that? And then that opens to a much bigger discussion of dimensions. Now, you and I like to talk about wheelbase because that is the space between the wheels, which translates to where you package people, the most important aspect of a car. And if you look at this, you think it's really kind of small, and it is. However, wheelbase, it's actually an inch longer than a Toyota RAV4. That kind of surprised me. But really, the competition is sitting in the Mercedes showroom right next to it, and that's the GLB. That's 4 inches longer in wheelbase. Overall length, though, the GLB is over 10 inches longer. Then there's storage, specifically back there. A GLB, because it doesn't have the swoopy arse end, it's more of like a box, that has 5 cubic feet of storage more than this. But if you put the seats down, that one has 13 more cubic feet of storage. Brakes are somewhat of a mixed bag here. If I get to an aggressive panic stop, don't try this at home. You definitely feel the ass end kind of pick itself up and approximate itself to where it thought it used to be. But that's in panic stop situations. Overall modulation of the pedal around town, and I've driven this somewhat aggressively in the past couple of days, and there's definitely good pedal feel here. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game of mine, the Options game, with today's contestant, a 2021 Mercedes GLA 250 4MATIC SUV for a base price of $38,230. So far, so good. To that, we add Cosmos Black Metallic. As a Greek man, I will say Efkaristo. However, $720 for black paint. Niva Gray and Black MB text, meaning not leather, for $0. The multi-function sport steering wheel. This is something we see in a lot of Mercedes, $360. The 20-inch AMG wheels, which look very good here, $750. The heated and vented seats, I believe that's for the front, only $950. The panoramic sunroof, which really transforms the interior of this car, $1,500, money well spent. And then the head-up display. I love me a head-up display, but do I $1,100 love it? You know what? Comments below. Sirius XM radio is optional on an almost $40,000 car, $460. The adjustable rear seat, you know what? That's a usable option. Yes, $360. The Burmester stereo, something we love on Mercedes Benz as well as Porsche. However, this one is not quite as fancy as those like $4,000 to $6,000 systems. This one is a bargain at $850. 64 color ambient lighting is optional for $310. I'm gonna put that in the same bucket as the Sirius XM radio and call it Give Me a Break. And then we press on to something else that should not be optional on an almost $40,000 car, a Qi wireless charger. However, I will give them some points for ingenious design. There is an arm that swings out and holds your phone in place while you are driving. A very neat touch, but is it $200 new? You think about that. While we press on to something that would qualify for a prize as the cheapest or least expensive option ever in the history of this game, a USB-C cable adapter for $25. Anyway, pressing on to packages. The driver's assistance package, this is important in a Mercedes. Distronic Plus, as well as lane keep assist and other safety doodads, $1,700. The parking assistance package, this is the active park assist and everything that works in conjunction with it, $1,090. Then the exterior lighting package, this is the active LED headlights as well as other support for it, $900. Wow, there's still more packages. The multimedia package, this is important in a Mercedes because I've said this to you before. This is the answer to the question of why would you buy the navigation from the OEM? Answer, augmented reality in a very large screen, very cool, and I would say worth the $1,295 asking price. The AMG line package, which changes the grille and all this stuff here, $2,240. Premium package. Now this is surprisingly important in one of these cars, because you know those fancy screens you see in there? It looks like one whole screen, but really it's two screens side by side. Without this package, those screens go from this to like this. It does not look pretty. So it is well worth the $1,750. To that, we add the destination and handling for $1,050 for a total retail price of, built-in, $55,840. You guys may remember in many of our recent AMG episodes that I've been very critical about how light the steering is. Not so much the steering feel, but the weight of the steering. It's just too light to me. Here, this is the perfect application of what we're seeing from the folks in Stuttgart. And here's why a lighter steering matches the personality of this car. It is intended to be a somewhat sizable city car. It's a shorter wheelbase vehicle, and by having lighter steering in this overall package, it makes the vehicle more usable. You've heard me say this before, design, it's a very difficult discussion to have with you guys because I never like to tell you what you can see, and in reality, beauty is indeed in the eye of the beholder. That said, I will go so far as to say no one would call this beautiful. It would be more of the heading of handsome. However, it's a big departure from the car it replaces. Not that it looks nothing like a GLA that came before it. It kind of looks like the same car, just with softer edges. And that's what disturbs me. The harder edges of the previous generation made the car stand out more. This makes it stand out less. And then there's another thing that I didn't quite expect. It is significantly larger than you'd expect when you see it in person, and that's a big function of it is about 4 inches taller, although it is a wee bit shorter. Now that said, I've spent some time really looking at this thing because it reminds me of something, and not a GLA. And then finally, the ball dropped. There is another car, obviously a crossover, that has come out recently that I think looks identical to this. So I'm going to turn this around to you guys with two questions. Number one, what other new sort of baby buggy looks just like this or looks just like that? And is this design successful, not successful, why or not? Let me know in the comments below. A note about the usability of this interior design. We've seen the same MBUX theme throughout many lower-end Mercedes, the GLB, the A220, and obviously now this. However, this is the most usable application of it, and it's not because this is any different. It's almost the same here. It's the expanse beyond the MBUX, beyond this screen here, where it's a bit more distance between it and the base of the windshield. So the overall feeling here is you've got a bit more expanse, you've got a bit more space, and it makes a small vehicle feel like a larger vehicle. You're not going to want to hear this, but I'm still confused. Even after driving this thing for a while and coming to the realization this thing drives very similar to a GLB, it's got a very similar personality to a GLB, it's got very similar strengths. I would argue it's got a little bit more weaknesses than a GLB because it doesn't have as much utility, which is the reason why I want one of these things in the first place. I want it to look like a Tonka squared off truck. I want to be able to put more people and dogs into this thing. That's the purpose. That's why this one I wouldn't want. But at the end of the day, that's where the confusion does get cleared up, because if you think back to when this thing first came out, there was also another kind of SUV that came out, the swoopy Coupe SUV, and the cheapest one was like $100 grand at that point. All of us were scratching our heads, and they were only for rich people. Well, apparently in 2021, that has changed because now you can get one for 38 grand. They're not for rich people anymore.